So the idea was having the post-lunch slot. We're like, can we get a video? I mean, come on, this is NBC Universal, right? And think about the content, entertainment brands, news brands, theme park brands. You must have some piece of content, Will. And of course, he said, absolutely. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the stage.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm John Sedlak. I'm with mParticle. I'm the CRO of the company. And I've got Will Gonzalez, who one of our favorite partners, running the data practice at NBC Universal. Little switch in plans here for Will. So I was given the introduction to read, but I'm going to actually mix it up. This is fine, but not enough justice here for Will's background. So check this out, folks. How many of you can say that you can break down the engine of an airplane and put it back together? Anybody here can do that? Will, raise your hand.
Look at that.
Right? Okay.
Kevin.
So we're looking at a guy whose background deserves to be walked through a bit here. So you went to the aviation high school, which is one of the most prominent high schools in America, that teaches high school age kids how to actually get into the aviation industry.
Yeah.
Point of this is, do you think you have to be technical to understand that? So at a young age, that's how Will kicked off his career. He then went, which I have a lot of appreciation for this, having worked at some of the traditional media brands myself. You spent, what, 7 or 8 years working for the Gray Lady, I think they called it?
Gray Lady.
So this is the New York Times. So this is during an era when the digital revolution was just taking off, and Will played a pretty prominent role in digitizing the New York Times in product, business development, digital operations, right? So setting you know how to build an airplane, now you know how to build a website, distribute news content, pretty awesome stuff. Then Sony. So these real shabby brands, right? New York Times. Then Sony comes calling, and they ask Will to take on the project to manage J.K. Rowling's business, so the Harry Potter series, where he ran the overall business development and monetization for that incredible series before taking on additional roles at Sony over the next 6 or 7 years. Right? So you've been at this now for about 15 years at that point.
Yeah.
And then a couple years ago, the folks at NBCU came calling.
Yeah.
And they said, you've got this technical background, you understand the media business, marketing, ad tech, martech. Help us figure out our data conundrums across, the properties that you guys just saw across the screen. So pretty impressive stuff, and I gotta say, pretty well-planned LinkedIn page that helped me make that introduction.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about that? What did I miss? And tell us about what you're doing at NBC.
I was fortunate enough to be a digital native at some of the largest brands that were going through sort of pretty dramatic transitions in their overall business plan. And so, being a digital native, being young and ambitious, took on a lot of responsibilities and just continued to grow and learn and grow and learn, and brought me to where I am today, really driving the data strategy for one of the largest media entertainment companies in the world.
So you've been there now 2 years.
2 years.
We met about a year ago.
Yeah.
Right? We, full disclosure, guys, so these guys are an important and pretty strategic partner. I like to look at it as there's reciprocity in the relationship, right? We're driving innovation on both sides. Yeah. So when someone like Brian Roberts, who's the chairman and CEO of Comcast, and or Stephen Burke, who runs NBC Universal, when they charge you with the tasks that they put forth, like how are they measuring the charter of your team? Like they say, go out and do this, and every 6 months or so, what's the definition of success for your team?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's the hypocritical oath of do no harm, right? Don't break it. The company's been doing really well since Comcast took over. It's a company rich with history in producing compelling content, compelling experiences. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we infuse and leverage some data to help ourselves be a bit more successful going forward. And so success looks like providing tools, data, insights, really self-service tools to help our colleagues that run these businesses, that run these P&Ls, just have another tool in your tool belt to be smarter and to make better business decisions. And so the more practical use of the data that we bring to the table, the tools that we bring to the table by those businesses, that's what Steve and Brian really care about.
Okay. So you were essentially starting this team from scratch. right? You didn't inherit
No.
the team.
We had some people, but we started from scratch for the most part.
Yeah. So how do you start? And what does the implementation look like? You have to go out, you meet with different technology vendors, try to understand the tools that are available to you in the ecosystem. Walk us through that, how that
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that most companies do is they say, well, we want to be data focused and we want to be data centric. And so the first thing on their line item is, okay, hire a data scientist. Right, and if you've been there, I think a lot of us have heard that that's the wrong strategy. I mean, the worst place you want to be is we all know data scientists are valuable resources. They're highly skilled, highly compensated, right? And the last thing you want to do is to bring on a data scientist and have them spend the first 6 months, a year cleaning your data, normalizing your data, just figuring out where it exists, right? And so the first thing for us was basically investing in data engineering resources, thinking about data management holistically across the organization, finding analytical resources who could dive into the data. They had coding skills. They can go ahead and find insights and deliver out some opportunities, and certainly bring in some data scientist resources as well. But it's a mixture of skill sets and resources, but the foundation of it is really bringing your data together, which sounds really simple, but with a company like ours where we have close to 20 individual brands that operate independently, and that's part of the reasons why we've been so successful. The byproduct of that is data becomes really siloed across every part of those organizations, across those brands. And so if we're trying to get a better sense of who our customer is, bringing all that data into a common sort of platform and a common taxonomy is a big part of the challenge and the opportunity.
So we were talking the other night about everybody uses the term or the phrase, data or big data, I think too broadly, right? And the definition of data applies to different companies in different ways. Even within NBC Universal, data to CNBC or data to Fandango or data to the theme park are different things. There's different first-party signal that they're able to access and make sense of. How do you think about it, vis-a-vis the definition of data?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really focused on consumer-level data, hence the knowing your customer part of it. And so, it's everything from mobile ad IDs and email addresses, obviously, cookies, but all behavioral data and transactional data, viewership data, app data, website information. As much of those behavioral and transactional signals that we can tie to a consumer, whether that consumer is a known consumer or an anonymous consumer, that's how we think about our first-party data. But we don't limit it there. I mean, we spend a lot of money in the duopolies out there, Facebook and Google, and I try to remind people that the data that exists in those walled gardens are technically our first-party data as well, and we challenge our partners. I think we can do that because we spend a significant amount of money with them, but we challenge them to help us figure out how that data can be exposed to us, how we can leverage it, how we can analyze it, so that we can be more effective and efficient, albeit in their channels, right? So we won't be able to take that data out of their walled gardens, but we can be more effective and more efficient within their environments.
Yeah. So you've got all these brands. Must be easy, huh?
Yeah.
Getting them all to play nice, or you say fight nice, guys.
Yeah.
What's been talk to us about some of the interesting moments or challenges getting the folks to cooperate within a massive, it's really a $200 billion company.
Yeah.
You look at Comcast, but even NBC Universal, call it a $50 billion part of that.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. It's not a top-down organization. It's not like we can go down and say, okay, everyone must do this. So there's a lot of managed by influence. There's a lot of relationship building, and there's a lot of
managed by influence? What is that?
Well, we don't necessarily, given that we are sit in a corporate group, we can't just unilaterally say, okay, everyone's going to throw their data into this environment, and these are the tools you're going to use, right? And so you have to figure out how to persuade, influence, empathize with your colleagues that inevitably are just in the weeds of running their business as they should be, but then show them the value of working together in sort of this data space. And so that's a big part of what we do, but it's not easy. It's exhausting. I think you have 30 or so meetings every month or so with different parts of the organization. Even within one brand, there are different stakeholders, whether you're dealing with the marketing people or the IT people or the digital product people, the creatives. I mean, they're sort of spread out. And so it's there's a lot of frequent flyer miles that I earn, flying out to LA and different parts of the organization. Now with the Sky acquisition, I'm spending a lot more time in London as well, trying to sort of connect with my colleagues over there. But there's a lot of sort of just relationship building and connecting with those businesses to show them how working together in this sort of data ecosystem just makes us all more effective.
Cool. So we were talking a bit last night at dinner. So you have a pretty unique perspective where you were deep in the media companies for a while, right? You watched the ad tech ecosystem develop. You know, we're not, like, we ain't ad tech. Like, we don't talk about what mParticle does as ad tech so much anymore. But you made an interesting point last night that, you know, it's where you spend most of your time is thinking about the MarTech ecosystem, like every single day. And you made a point about how much more complicated it's become, but how much more, you know, greater the opportunities are if you can properly leverage those tools. And it's not about just picking, you know, one marketing cloud, you know, and their software. So walk us through some of that thinking. I thought it was pretty interesting last night.
I mean, everyone saw the MarTech stack that Michael threw up before. I mean, I think the last count, 7,000 vendors in this space. Like, I dare any of you to tell me which is the best and why, right? And I think part of the challenge is that you've got these large marketing cloud platforms, Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe, that sort of position themselves as sort of best-in-class experiences, but the reality is, you know, they have components that are best in class, like Adobe Analytics, I would argue, is one of the best products out there, but there are other parts of their stack that I think are just not best in class. And so the downside of working with those companies, and I think they're amazing, is that you get locked into an ecosystem where you're not really having the flexibility to test out any one of those 7,000 vendors, right? And so I think that's a challenge, especially when, you know, there's a shift going on from best in class to fit for purpose, right? And you'll hear this quite a bit come up if you haven't heard already. It's just really finding the technology that meets your needs, specifically your needs, is certainly sort of good enough to solve those needs, but also fits with the skill sets that you have in your organization, right? Don't sign up for a platform where you don't have the engineering resources to do the things that you want to do, right? Find something that's going to allow your marketers, your business analysts to do the plug and play approach and activating against that. And so I think, and that's where I think companies like mParticle, I think, allow us to be flexible. I think of mParticle as enabling us to be flexible and having our data portable and having the flexibility to, you know, turn on an Amplitude or turn on, it could be Adobe, I mean, or to turn on any sort of tool that's out there. Try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then you're not locked into a monolithic stack trying to figure out how to unwind yourself.
I'm glad we recorded that. So we're about halfway through the implementation of many of the brands that we're bringing on board. And just for perspective or background, the relationship between mParticle and NBCU started with a specific brand. It was NBC Entertainment, and we'd worked with that brand for about 3 years. So when we got the introduction to the corporate group at NBC Universal, you know, Will and his team, there were a lot of lessons that were already learned, right? Which was helpful, I think, to that conversation. And then I'll never forget the first time that we met. It was like, John, you know, that's one brand. I've got, you know, 20 some odd brands to bring on to this platform. So that data challenge is not for the faint of heart, right? So, you know, the implementation, like we're both working hard. We're halfway, we're into what, 8 or 9 brands in, learning together. Fast forward a year from now, what do you see as the most important use cases? And not even you as the customer, like the brands, right? Because at the end of the day, you and us have to drive them value. Where do you want us to be a year from now when you look at the use cases?
I mean, I think the most valuable use cases are things that we just don't know yet, right? I mean, once you have the data together, once you start leveraging it, I think you'll start organically learning about behaviors, and you'll start developing cohorts based on those behaviors. But thus far, the value that the businesses get really excited about is just really simply sharing audiences for cross-marketing activation, right? You know, we have a big, if you guys have been to Universal Parks in Orlando, you know, they do a big thing every year for Halloween. It's Halloween Horror Night. It's a big event. It's massive. And by the way, we have a business in Fandango where we're selling tickets to movies that we create, right? And so how do we identify people who went out to see us, as an example, right? And invite them to our parks, because they probably have a high propensity to like horror experiences, right? And so those are the logical opportunities that I think we're uncovering, but I think the real opportunity is once all that data is in, the things that we just don't know, right?
Yeah.
What's the longitudinal view of a viewer who consumes SNL, Sunday Night Football, and MSNBC, right? And what are the behaviors that they're driving that allow us to be more predictive about what's next to put in front of them? I think that's where the opportunity is.
Yeah. It's not even what programming are they consuming, or what content or entertainment brands are they engaging with. It's through what devices is that happening, right?
Yeah.
Time of day.
Yeah.
I mean, any of you have kids, I know my kids consume a bunch of NBCU brands, but not on the normal hour, right? It's at the end of the day, it's like they're all about, on demand.
Yeah.
And thank God you guys have pivoted to that. And I know that everything they do, the data is being collected, and I'm seeing them actually get presented with much, much more compelling content.
Yeah.
Right? So we grew up in a world that was different, but we're now part of the industry that's driving it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
So when you think about the number of eyeballs that NBCU touches through all the entertainment brands, it's a massive, massive scale, right? There are very few companies that touch, in the hundreds of millions of eyeballs, right?
Yeah.
So there's also a responsibility that you have as a company,
Yeah.
right, to make sure that the way you're doing it is obviously sensitive toward, things like privacy, which we always talk about. But how do you drive that digital transformation at that scale to make sure that the experiences they are getting, respect the privacy, but at the same time, you could do it in a way that's not just a test. Because if you're going to move the needle at a place like NBCU, and that's how many eyeballs you're trying to affect, it's a pretty big job.
Yeah. I mean, you always start with a test and learn approach, and then you figure out how to scale what works. It's a daunting task. I mean, you've got hundreds of millions of eyeballs. We have hundreds of millions of IDs, consumer IDs, that are interacting with us across all of our businesses. Obviously, they're not all unique, but just to think about how you can personalize experiences to those customers at a one-to-one level is a pretty daunting sort of challenge, right? And so I think the secret, and this is the same for all of us here, is finding the balance between delivering something that's relevant, that's personalized, that sort of exceeds the expectation of the customer from an experience perspective, but at the same time, you don't freak them out. Don't creep them out, right?
Yeah.
Deliver value, but do it in a way where the consumer doesn't feel like their privacy has been violated, right? And I think we've all been in experiences where you're having a conversation with someone offline, you're not online, you're not searching for anything, and the next day you're seeing an ad that ties exactly the conversation you just had, and you're like, oh shit. It's how I bought these sneakers, right? I'm a big Jordan fan. I was talking to my wife about buying some Jordans, and next thing you know, Instagram had a photo of the release of these sneakers. I was like, wow, a little creepy, but it was great. I loved them, I bought them, right? And so you get over that creepiness pretty quick when it's relevant and it's tied to what you want, but you've got to respect that boundary. And I think test and learn is a big part of that, because it is a slippery slope, because you do want to make sure you don't lose the trust of your customers.
Now I know why there's a UPS guy delivering Zappos boxes to my house every day. My kids have to turn off the voice recognition.
Voice recognition, right?
So a final parting thought, if you would. So you think about the experiences you've had, some of these great brands, and now here you're sitting. You've got big responsibility. You're managing all this data. What were some of the things that best prepared you for this job? Because there's nobody that necessarily trained for exactly the role you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You're not building an airplane,
right,
but you're doing something that's equally as complex.
Yeah.
When you look back at the Sony experience, at the New York Times experience, what's positioned you well? Because it looks like you were thinking about it the whole time as you went through your career, and I'm sure you weren't.
I wish I was. No, I think I started off with a technical background. So yeah, I understood sort of engineering and mechanical engineering. I was doing coding, web development when I was at the New York Times. This is early days. NewYorkTimes.com was just launched, right? I was involved in video. I mean, I was talking about OTT back in 2002, 2004, when the New York Times was just creating video for the first time, and I was sitting in front of the executive editor of the paper, which is like one of the most iconic roles in the world, trying to convince them that we need to put video on the homepage, and that was not an easy conversation, right? And so building, understanding the technology side, being able to understand what it requires to get things done has been really helpful. managing by influence has always been a big part of my toolkit, and trying to figure out how to empathize with people who are inevitably focused on their day job or what they're trying to do. And so figuring out how you can convey a message that can help them achieve their goals in a faster way. And I'm sure there's been a little bit of fortune along the way as well. So,
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate the partnership and certainly the time.
Great.
One more thing, and this is not planned. I understand your son is in the room.
Yeah.
So let's give a shout out to, well, there he is. Quick round of applause there. Thank you very much, Will. Guys, appreciate it. All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.